What's a good word, everyone? It's your boy DKB here. I just want to say thanks for all the support. The channel's been steadily growing, and the number you see below, you can drop a text, shoot a voicemail, any ideas, topics, collabs, etc. you guys want to see. I'll include them in future videos and live streams, and I'll catch you again. Be easy. What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. And of course, with this being the boring part of the NFL offseason, Aaron Rodgers found a way to sneak himself back into the New York media. And this time he's burning a former New York Jets coach to the ground based on a conversation that he had with Mark Schlereth, who, according to reports, is not only a close friend, but part of his inner circle, if you will, of kind of his brain trust. So as the conversation goes, and this is from Mark Schlereth's point of view, they were talking about the run game and really just how poor it was, ineffective, inefficient, and really just terrible all around. And at some point, Aaron Rodgers goes on a tirade, but I guess more specifically a diatribe around for 25 minutes around how horrendous it actually was, which there's a lot that you can dive into this, right? There's a lot of different avenues to look at this. For one, the fact that he's still speaking about New York in a negative light should be a whole topic in and of itself, because even with the way the Packers treated him for the last couple of years prior to the trade being pulled off, I don't recall him really saying anything overly negative or even consistently about the Packers whatsoever. And obviously, it's an organization that he won the Super Bowl with, definitely a more well-run and well-operated franchise than what we've seen with the Jets. But still, for everything that he's done and to see how he kind of got walked out the door, of course, his own actions involving in that is interesting to see that immediately we're seeing a direct turnaround, and he's taking shots at the Jets whenever possible here, right? The second piece would be he essentially got to handpick and operate, getting his own coaching staff to a certain degree in, getting his own scheme, getting his own players in, the wish list, you name it, in order to make this really an Aaron Rodgers centric offense. And what does that mean? One where he's going to be able to throw the ball essentially at will and really just have free control over that offense the way that he sees fit. And while that may not have 100% been the case, right, from the standpoint that obviously he's not developing a playbook as well as playing GM, as well as being the actual offensive coordinator on game days, but that's essentially what he set himself up for. And it's the New York Jets' own idiocy that we even allowed something like that to take place, right? But with that said, you can't ask for the cow and then cry over the milk just because things didn't go the way you really wanted it to. And I feel like that's essentially what we're seeing here. So to get into the comments, Mark Schlereth starts off by saying, Aaron and I had a conversation about when he was with the Jets, how abysmal the running game was, and how schematically it made no sense. And to that degree, I don't think you'll see many people argue with it. I was one of the few supporters of Keith Carter during his tenure, just from the standpoint that we did see some elements of good things when it came to player development, even though the product as a whole was bad. So with the bad outweighing the good, fair point for those that called out my support of Keith Carter there. Still don't think it was 100% negative, but the product is what the product is, and ultimately Keith Carter never really put up a highly effective run game. And even for the development of some of these guys, you can put the argument out there that some of these guys would have been good enough to put up this same season no matter what the coach was, and that he wasn't necessarily getting the best out of said players, let alone all the call outs previously from Mekhi Becton and former players that worked under him as it relates to his workplace tendencies, right, to put it nicely. But Mark Schlereth goes on to say, I started the conversation, and then Aaron went on for about a 25-minute diatribe on their run game. We don't really get much detail into what that 25-minute diatribe actually detailed and what it ultimately ended up being, but we can kind of get the gist of it based on how Mark Schlereth wrapped things up, where he said, I was like watching the Jets last year, and it was the worst schematic run game I've ever watched in the NFL. There's a difference between having guys who can't block. I've seen that too, right? But having your players do things that make zero sense. This makes no sense. There's a zero chance of that being successful, right? And that goes into a number of other elements, right, where Robert Saleh really got a ton of blame for that same thing since he is the head coach. But in that same token, you look at all of the times last year and even the year prior when Aaron Rodgers was hurt and he was attending Jets games and running out there on the sideline in order to just kind of get a sense and a feel for how things were going. Plays would be called, and it didn't matter if it was run or pass, but plays were called. You could see Aaron Rodgers immediately shaking his head, looking confused, pissed before the play was even finished, right? The moment it was called in, and of course, having Zach Wilson out there, he's not going to be a guy that's looking to audible and do all these changes in order to try to course correct the call. But even in the offseason, you think about before that 2024 season happened, all offseason we were getting reports excuse me, that Aaron Rodgers was just changing plays at will and seemed like almost on an every down basis, whatever was getting called, he was going back out there and making immediate changes to it. And so not only did he undermine the OC that he actually wanted in Nathaniel Hackett, but you also look at the fact that when he was audibling or whatever situations he was trying to get the New York Jets offense in or out of, it wasn't working. So you obviously have a player skill problem, you have a scheme problem, you have an execution problem, but Aaron Rodgers pointing the fingers here makes absolutely zero sense to me. We know what happened with the run game last year. I don't think this is eye-opening news to anyone, but this also feeds into that debate about how much of a leader was Aaron Rodgers actually last year. And there was a lot of good stuff that we saw coming out, right? You had him working with Zach Kuntz directly during his rehab period, and we were hearing good things come up about that. Not to say that we really seen anything out of Zach Kuntz, but still, you heard how him being part of the Jets flight squad was really helping out. You heard him kind of taking Zach Wilson directly back under his wing, at least when he was available for games or being a part of the New York Jets. Rehabbing at their center or attending some of the practices. And you have a number of the other players like on the offensive line and such. CJ Mosley being a huge hype man of Aaron Rodgers, for example, that talked about just how good it was having Aaron Rodgers just trying to execute an offense against them, because it gave them a lot of cues, a lot of insight, a lot of tips that Aaron Rodgers actually came up to guys or was willing to share as they kind of broke down practices and why certain plays worked or didn't work. But ultimately, oddly enough, it felt like the defense benefited a lot more from Aaron Rodgers' presence than anybody on the offensive side did, and I include the coaching staff from that standpoint. So while I think this is ultimately water on the bridge, we no longer have Keith Carter, and really Aaron Glenn has washed any semblance of what happened last year completely out of the building. But still, it's an odd situation because depending on how that conversation would have went, you can also potentially predict who he would have been trying to throw under the bus in terms of not only Nathaniel Hackett, who again he handpicked, but also Keith Carter, again, offensive line and run game coordinator. But potentially, maybe he's even calling out Breece Hall, right? As a guy who did, in my opinion, let Aaron Rodgers down when it came to a lot of the drops, when it came to the 5 or 6 fumbles on the season that it had, when it came to the lack of ability to hit the hole between the tackles and make something happen, and really a lot of the wiggle and contact balance that we've seen in the home run threats from years prior as well. So maybe there's a bit of lost faith there as well. Also playing behind the 8 ball with, multiple scores down before halftime and such didn't help. You'll see in a lot of those articles where they pinpoint, of course, us having the second least rushing attempts, and of course a ground game that just overall wasn't highly effective. But it's interesting nonetheless. Let me know what you guys think. I mean, honestly, I was really over talking about Aaron Rodgers last year pretty quickly anyways, but hopefully this is the last time we really have to chat about them this offseason, unless we get something more meaningful, maybe about some guys on the offensive side of the ball in terms of players and why he thinks some of these guys developed or didn't. But I chalk this up to a big nothing. I think you're, again, going to see immediate changes to everything that happened last year. But Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this whole situation with Aaron Rodgers calling out the run game and coaching staff. And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.